Hey, paisans, the time has come. On the air since 2009, the independently produced, non-FCC compliant champ of video game talk podcasting. Here comes Tiger Claw Radio. Here's your host, Critical Failure.
Yes, friends, Tiger Claw Radio. Boys and girls, we got some chiptunes, we got some video game news, some discussion. We got another slot in the top 8 of the first 8 Final Fantasy games from our good friend Hemrock. And it's going to be, we're going to try and make it a feel-good show after last week with Charles Marionette retiring. And with that, let's return to the top 40, which we're almost at the end of the 8-Bit Collective Archive. We're on track number 5. Yes, we're in the top 5 of the top 40 of 8,000 tracks. This is I'm probably saying this wrong, but this is Wycland and Nyland with Candy Coast. You're listening to Tiger Claw Radio. That is Hemrock continuing his trend of picking the happy songs, which I do appreciate. It's on brand for us. I think it's on theme for today's show. Once again, and I know I'm going to get the title, that's Wycland and Nyland, Wyklund and Nylin. I believe that's Nyland, or Nyland, I don't know. They made an awesome track. All right, so here's what I want to do. I've got a stack of stuff on the Discord that Hemrock has posted over the last couple weeks, and it's mostly in the Failbag channel. So historically, I would save it for the end of the show. But these are all like news posts and releases of upcoming games and hardware. And I really want to go through it because I think this is top of the show stuff. And then after that, I played a game this past week called The Forest, which is not a new game, but it's one that I played, and I recorded a 5-minute bit about The Forest, just a quick rundown. So we're going to do Hemrock's noteworthy games and stuff, then we're going to do The Forest review, then after that we're going to revisit the top 8 of the first 8 Final Fantasy games. Alright, let's jump over to the Discord. This goes back, I think, further than is comfortable for me. So I guess my apologies to Hemrock. And thank you for continuing to drop these articles, even though I haven't been reading them. But we go back to, a couple months ago. He says, the Sega Saturn mini console hasn't been ruled out, but don't expect it. How do you guys feel about the trend of mini consoles? Personally, like I kind of feel like that was a hot trend, like maybe 5 years ago or something, but it's kind of died off now. You remember when the NES Mini hit and it was like crazy and like it sold out really quick, typical with new Nintendo hardware, and it was like scarcity was a thing, and they were getting scalped. And then the SNES one came out, and that one was really cool because even though I kind of thought the mini consoles were really silly, they released like a Star Fox 2 prototype on it or something like that. You know, the C64 Mini, which personally I kind of feel like is part of that trend. There's an Amiga Mini that I really want to get at some point. There is a really cool TurboGrafx 16 Mini. Mini consoles, they were a thing for a while. A good way to preserve history, and I know Sega Genesis in particular did it a couple of times. But he has an article here about a potential Sega Saturn Mini, and that blows my mind. Like, it's one of those things where personally I had ruled out like a long time ago, just because, from what I understand, the way these things work is if you buy like an NES Mini, you're buying an NES emulator on a technical level, and all the rights and privileges. It's not piracy like it is if you go download an emulator, but on a technical level, that's an emulator with a bunch of ROMs on it. And Sega Saturn is historically the hardest, or if not, one of the hardest consoles to emulate ever. It's possible to do it, but the hardware that it requires is higher than the rest of those systems, and the games that work on it is lower than the rest of those systems. So personally, I don't think a Sega Saturn Mini is going to happen, personally. Time will tell. I could be wrong. I also don't think a Nintendo 64 Mini is going to happen, but that is far more likely than a Sega Saturn Mini. But apparently it hasn't been ruled out, so we'll see what happens. We got a couple of things. Yeah, that was the retro news. Gimmick, a cult classic sort of platformer for the Famicom, getting a physical release on the Switch. There you go. And Retro Dodo's article about Gex is back. Do you guys remember Gex? I remember Gex from the PS1 era, and it was not a game I played, really. Like, I think I played it once on, like, a toy store display, but it wasn't a game it was a... It was a platformer with like a gimmicky character in a time in which platforms with gimmicky characters was like the hot thing. You had your Sonic the Hedgehog, and a bunch of companies were trying to come up with their Sonic the Hedgehog or Mario. Sega Saturn had the Bug. You had I don't know, a lot of characters like that. Crash Bandicoot was really hot. Gex, lesser known version of that type of game. And I know there were people in our circle, Gex Up in particular, who championed for a new Gex game. So, a complete PS1 trilogy coming to consoles and PC. I don't know if that qualifies as a new game, but that is an official Gex release. And the only other Gex release I've heard of in each and every one of the years since it was new is that the GOG has a version of like the OG Gex. So there it is. If you remember Gex from back in the day, it is a thing that exists, and we are guaranteed video accelerated graphics. Okay, here's one that really piques my interest. This is Funny Playing has released something called the Burn Master, which is a dock, a reading/writing dock for Game Boy cartridges. And it's not the first of its kind, but there was something like this that ran about $50 a couple years back, sold out quicker than I could get my hands on one. And it was something I really wanted because it would manage, you could manage saves on your classic Pokemon games, right? Which I thought was really cool. Never got my hands on one of those things. And here's the Funny Playing Burn Master, which appears to do that. The only thing is, I'm looking at this thing. It's not like a product that you can buy that works. This looks more like a PCB seller. You see this a lot in the synthesizer world. rather than selling the put-together product, the idea is you build this. So it's not like, oh, it's $50 to get one of these things, and they'll ship it, and then you can plug it in and use it. No, it's not. It's $1 to get the PCB, and another $4 to get the casing. But you also need to get a hold of like a bill of materials, which means you're going to have to get, I would imagine you'd have to buy, resistors and capacitors, at the bare minimum. And then you'd have to solder it all together and make it work. So those, I was super interested in that sort of thing in the synthesizer world for a while, because if you can get good with a soldering iron, and if you can figure out where, basic parts can be purchased, you can get something up and running a lot cheaper. In the Eurorack world, you're talking about like a $100 module for like $40. $60 off. The downside is you got to assemble it, and you got to wait for all the parts to show up in the mail, which sounds simple, but if you're buying like a whole bunch of different types of electrical components from a bunch of different retailers, as opposed to the unit showing up in the mail, it's going to trickle in the mail over the course of a couple weeks. So I think that's a really cool idea. Huge pain in the butt, but I think releasing products like this makes it cheaper for the end user. It encourages more people to take up soldering, which is incredibly easy, and a lot of people don't like to do it. And yeah, I think that's a neat thing. I probably won't get one just because I haven't been using my Game Boy hardware a lot over the past year or so. But that's a really cool thing that showed up in the news via Hemrock a couple of months ago. All right, so the following day says, good to hear. Okay, that's an actual, this is an actual question, but we're going to go ahead and read it anyway just because it's been missed. Good to hear from old Death Adder. Good question to Death Adder and or CF. Is Tomb Raider Anniversary any good? And I think the answer to that is, if you like Tomb Raider, yes, it's good. If you are not familiar with Tomb Raider, I wouldn't start there. I had a great time with Stardew Valley when I picked it up on the Switch. Part of the fun of the game is figuring out how to automate or increase the efficiency of your daily tasks. Yep, I would agree with that. I bought it on Android, which I'd been putting off for a long time, and I haven't played it on Android once. I have the feeling my time with Stardew Valley came in a flash, burned really bright, and then has since fizzled. But it is a good game. Don't know much about Wrestlemans, but I did play a lot of WCW NWO Revenge for N64 back in the day. Often played as Rey Mysterio. Ever played any of the old N64 wrestling games? The only one I played on the N64 was WWF Attitude, and it was okay. I like RTS games. Suggestions include CNC Red Alert, awesome choice, StarCraft, and for the old school feel, Dune 2 Battle of Arcus for the Sega Genesis. Cheers. My sincerest apologies. I can't remember if I've read this or not, because my brain is just Swiss cheese these days. But good stuff, man. Hang on one second real quick here. Next up, which we're going to touch on just briefly, the Evercade Showcase Volume 2 Indie Special came out a couple months ago. It was a big drop for Evercades. I know Hemrock's an Evercade guy, and I didn't make the jump personally, but they're doing some cool things, and that's undeniable. And I flipped through this and looked briefly at the stuff they're dropping, and the one that I think, in my opinion, is the coolest is the Home Computers Heroes one. It's the first one they show, and the reason why is because I really like the pre-NES computer stuff. It's an interest of mine. I think there's fascinating games there. They were made for an older audience, and the complexity was higher, and they were more experimental. I like those types of games. So I think that's a cool cartridge. Personally, since I don't have an Evercade, it's almost a system seller for me. Almost a system seller. The only thing that's stopping me is if that's the cartridge I'm going for, I'd probably be better off buying the Evercade Mini. which has come down in, or not the Evercade Mini, geez Louise, the Amiga Mini, which has come down in price a little bit. You guys remember the Amiga Mini? It was on Amazon for like $140 for a good long while. Well, it's finally dropped, and let me see what it's going for now. The Amiga 500 Mini is going for $129. So it's come down $20. Still a little pricey, but here's the thing about the Amiga. The Amiga had several different models that ran at different speeds. So yes, you can just emulate Amiga straight off your desktop and you're good to go. But it's a half step more complex than emulating, say, Commodore 64 or Apple II. And the reason is because you get your Amiga emulator, and you have to get a BIOS file, just like a PS1 emulator. But that BIOS file, they call it a kicker ROM or a kickstart ROM. And the idea is you have to get the kick ROM for each different type, right? So when you go out and get an Amiga game, you run your Amiga emulator, and it's running whichever kick ROM you have selected as if it was that model, right? So maybe if you're running the 500 model, the game will run slowly because it was an older Amiga, or you could switch the kick ROM over to a later model and it'll run faster. So if you're actually from that era, and maybe lived in the UK or Europe somewhere where it was more popular than, say, the NES, those people probably know, oh yeah, this game was released right around the time this is what people were playing, right? Similar to the way us Americans can tell you, which model NES was around when the late games in the console lifespan were coming out. So being an American, it's a little bit more complex to do emulation. So I kind of like the idea of a mini console that handles that half step of complexity for you. Yes, you can do it, but remember, these are for Amiga games, so they're simpler pleasures. So the complexity goes up for games that are not as as deep and engrossing as as later games, even later retro games. So I don't know. Amiga cartridge, good stuff. After the Evercade, he talks about a new Sega Genesis game called Asto Bros. And I looked at this, and they're selling the ROM file for $20, which I think is really cool. We're talking about a newly developed game. This is not like a total conversion of an existing game. And I looked at it, and I thought, GoldenEye. How we doing? I just experienced a complete shutdown, or not a shutdown, but a crash rather. So we're back after a reboot. Thank goodness. Audacity does a really good job with their snapshots and saving of backing up and project recovery. Because that was pretty awful. We were talking about a game on Sega Genesis that had just come out. For the ROM, $20 for the ROM, and I passed on it because there were other things to do. But I like the idea that new games are being made for old systems, not just for these exorbitant reproduction cartridges, but also you can just get the ROMs, what I think is awesome. So that was that, and I'm actually waiting for Discord to reopen so that I can go back to the fail bag and see what else we had lined up. Okay, this one is the Contra Anniversary Collection over on GOG. Is $4, and I just double checked, and it's still $4. Which is great. I've had this on Steam for a while. A lot of times I get these types of collections, and I only toy around with them a little bit. But for the Contra collection, I actually worked all the way through Contra and also Operation C. So I beat 2 games in that collection. I also see, just flipping through it, because I haven't opened it in a while, but this also has the original arcade game, which is very different from the Contra we know and love, as well as it looks like the Sega Genesis game and the Super Nintendo game as well. So $4, that is a solid buy for somebody who enjoys Contra. And that's one where you can play the different region versions. At least America and Japan. I don't remember if it had the European version like Pro Protector or not. But I remember the original Contra having some pretty massive differences between the American version and the Japanese version, like an entire introductory cutscene being cut out, animated trees and stuff that we didn't get in America, and things like that. So this is a game where it's cool to have the Japanese version. Good stuff. So consider picking that up if you haven't. Okay, this is the last one from Hemrock's batch. And again, big thanks to Hemrock for posting these. This is all the cool kids are talking about it. It's the Atari 2600 Plus, an official announcement trailer. And you can head over to the Discord and watch that. But this looks like the 4-switch Woody, not the 6-switch, but the 4-switch wood grain Atari 2600. But it's a modern console, so it has a lot of higher compatibility. So you can play 2,600 games, but it'll also play the 7,800 games as well. It has an HDMI out, again, modern console to be played on modern systems. And it has it comes with a multi-cart, a dip switch based multi-cart, which I think is cool. So I'm not talking about a ROM cart, like with a game picker when you open it up. There's 4 switches. 4 micro switches on this thing, and if you want to play, if you want to play combat, there is a switch combination drawn on the front that you have to flip the switches to follow. It's the way arcade games had their custom option set, back in the 80s. So I took a look at this thing, and I gotta say it looks really good. I don't think I would get it myself. I think I would go for the Retron 7600 or whatever the Hyperkin version is, because it's a little bit more compact, and I like the controllers. So, but that's a really cool thing. I'm so glad to see the Atari 2600 get some more shine. I think it's an amazing system. Over on the High Scores channel, I had a lot of fun playing, with Hemrock. He had his 4-game fiesta where he was trying to hit high benchmarks for a Miss Pac-Man, Missile Command, Sub Hunt, and Atlantis. And that was a lot of fun. I was only able to match him in one of those 4 games, which was Missile Command, and I was only able to do it by playing. I played on a Stella emulator, like just a vanilla Stella, not RetroArch, not anything fancy. And I did it straight off of Windows so that I could use my controller as opposed to the old joystick, which kind of felt weird. I felt like I couldn't out and out claim a victory crown because I wasn't using like an Atari joystick. I even had a USB Atari joystick somewhere, but I can't find it. I wonder if I got rid of it. But matching high scores, man. That's Atari is really, really good at it. If you've never done it, go download a copy of Stella. Play some Miss Pac-Man, play some Atlantis, and post screenshots in the High Scores thing on Discord, because that's been a good time. Those games take on a whole new meaning when the numbers they give you at the end actually mean something. All right, we're 23 minutes in. Quick moment to thank the sponsors. It's a Patreon-sponsored program. No ads, no companies, nothing like that. Just EmeraldRangers.com, who contributes to keep us going every week. Hemrock, Darabka, and Tecmo Balls. Thank you guys so much. I hope you're enjoying the party. All right, so here's my thoughts on the game The Forest. So I tried a game called The Forest, and this is a game on Steam. It's not a new game. It's been around a while, but this is one of those that I acquired on a sale, and my computer couldn't quite hack it. And now that I have this nice graphics card that I got from Swingle, thanks a lot, man, I installed it and gave it a shot. It sat in my backlog for quite some time, and if you've never played it, it's a lot like Rust. It's a game where it's survival. You have an enormous map, and you collect items, like wood and stuff, and you have to survive. And then at night, the bad guys come out You got these little cannibal dudes. They just sort of come out and leap around and come at you. Pretty cool game in that respect. But there were a couple of things I wasn't expecting to happen that made it like I couldn't really enjoy it. And the big thing was, and if you don't have kids, you're going to find this really ridiculous. But in the opening scene, you're on a plane and you're with your son, and your son's like clutching, he's asleep, and he's clutching his, it's a giant plastic like mech doll, like think like a Megazord, like a Power Rangers Megazord sort of thing, but royalty free version of that. And he's asleep, and the plane crashes, and before you're able to go and start the game, the cannibals come and take the boy. There's a couple instances of this happening in video games, but my fatherhood instinct just kicked in, and I was like, "This is unplayable for me. I can't," because I think it was the fact that he was clutching the toy, and my kids do that. I couldn't. I couldn't do it. The other big example of this happening was the game. Oh shoot, what was it called? It was really popular a lot of years ago. It's the one where you're working you're working like a passport kind of booth. Papers, Please. That's the game. Papers, Please had a similar thing. You as you're going through the game, your family just listed in text. By the way, you're using your pay to supply them with things. And at one point, it said "son equals dead," and I was like, "No, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I know it's ridiculous. Looking back, it's a great game. Just that turned me off. So that could be exclusive to me, but mechanically, it's a pretty neat game. It was kind of cool that. Well, first of all, I liked the game Rust, but I couldn't play it because of the other players. So I really liked the idea of, oh, it's like Rust, but there's nobody else. It's just me, unless I want to play co-op with somebody. So there's no like other people who will instantly kill you. It's just the bad guys from the game. I thought that was cool. Also, the map is not at all randomly generated. It is a single handcrafted map. It's extraordinarily large. So it kind of feels like different every time you play. But if you go to a website, you can see that there is a large map and everything's marked out, and you can kind of navigate your way around that way. So I thought that was kind of neat. It didn't. Not everything has to be procedurally generated. Especially we're talking about a game that I got on the cheap, and like it doesn't have to have endless gameplay. It just has to have decent gameplay for a while. So I looked up the endings to see what happens to the kid, and it's not good. So for that reason, I'm putting it aside unless one of my bros picks it up and wants to play co-op. One of my friends without kids. But I would say the best way to sum it up: a really cool game that I don't think I can play. It's called The Forest. It's overwhelmingly positive on Steam. So other people like it. Regular price is $20, but it goes down quite a bit when sales happen. It came out in 2018, so it's been a while now. So that's it. That was the latest in games that I couldn't play before that now I can. Switching gears now, here we have Hemrock with the latest in his Final Fantasy list.
Alrighty, folks, we are getting into the top four. Now, before I get to number four, I want to review where we've come so far. So, number 8 at the bottom of the list was Final Fantasy 2. Number 7 was Final Fantasy 4. Maybe a little contentious, maybe a bit of a surprise, but that's what I'm going with. Final Fantasy 4 for second to last. And then number 6 was the original Final Fantasy. Number 5 was Final Fantasy 8. Now, at number 4 is Final Fantasy 3. I would like to add that there is a jump from number 5 to 4, so I think there's a good margin separating Final Fantasy 3 from Final Fantasy 8, which was the number 5 pick. So Final Fantasy 3. Now we're cooking. As a reminder, I'm not referring to Final Fantasy 3 that was released in 1994 in North America. No, 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 no. We're going by the Japanese numbering system. This is Final Fantasy 3 that we did not receive until over a decade after its original release in Japan. This is the Final Fantasy 3 that arrived on the Famicom on April 27th, 1990. The very last Final Fantasy game for the original Famicom. I beat the Famicom version. I'm not enticed by the DS version. The 3D graphics just really throw it off for me. I've heard that there's some issues with that version. I really don't want to get into it. There is the new Pixel remaster. I've heard good things. I've never played it. I don't own it. Maybe I'll play it one day. It does look pretty cool. But I'm going to be talking about the Famicom version. I played it on my Retron 5 with a translation patch, and it was amazing. This is one of the most underappreciated Final Fantasy games in North America, and I think much of it is attributable to missing out on its original release date. Just imagine getting this in 1990. I mean, we got the original Final Fantasy in 1990, and this is a big step up from the original. This game did so many things and did many of them so well. It was the pinnacle of 8-bit art on the Famicom. They even repositioned some of the sprites so it had a more fuller presentation. There's more detail in those sprites. Some of the monster sprites were 8-bit Mona Lisas, if you will. There was more creativity given to the player. It introduced the new job system, which was groundbreaking for the series. Gone was the story driven hand holding from Final Fantasy II. Instead, you are welcomed into a new, large world to explore and conquer how you, yes, you, the player, saw fit with interchangeable classes. With some exceptions here or there, I'll talk about a couple of those momentarily. In the sprawling world come some creative environments, including a sunken temple, steampunk tower, a floating vine encased castle, and an underground dwarven enclave. There are also many secret passages, rewarding the intrepid explorer. The music here is an upgrade from the first two games. The OST standouts include the Overworld theme. I think this is known by some as Eternal Wind. Probably one of the best overworld themes in the Final Fantasy games I have played, which includes the first 8. So Eternal Wind as the overworld theme. You've got the peppy Pokemon-esque pirate ship tune, soothing melodies of the town of and town of Amur. The rocking Invincible tune, one of my favorite Final Fantasy tunes. So listen up, all you metal cover bands. Once you're finished milking Mega Man for all it's worth, you need to look into Final Fantasy III. Seriously, that's no joke. Final Fantasy III is a treasure trove for heavy metal covers. Now, as you may expect, Final Fantasy III is not a perfect game. One quote that sums it up well is its biggest flaw is not being Final Fantasy V. And there's a lot of truth to that. As Square brought out a game a few years after Final Fantasy III and improved on it in almost every way. Remember, Final Fantasy V was released in 1992 on the Super Famicom. Final Fantasy III came out in 1990. But let's set that aside. I want to talk about the job system. Job system wasn't perfect either. It had some flaws. There's some jobs that are largely useless. I'm looking at you, Bard, or at least handicaps your progress. Other jobs are simply outclassed by better jobs you attain later on in the game, such as a knight being a better warrior or a black belt being a better monk. There's also times where the game nearly requires you to change your party to a certain job type in order to complete an area. These points in the game are rather contrived and take a little away from the choose your own adventure approach the game lends itself to the majority of the time. Examples include when you have to minimize your entire party in order to fit through a small hole and travel in mini mode through that whole region, rendering physical attacks useless. Thus, you have to become some sort of mage character. Another great example is when fighting the bird Garuda. At that point in the game, you are restricted to one town till you beat this boss, and a guy in town hints that only dragoons can defeat Garuda. And oh, by the way, only one shop in the town is open, and it sells gear for dragoons. And if that wasn't enough, the townspeople give you free dragoon equipment. Okay, I get it. Now you don't have to follow their advice, but it's obvious what the developers were trying to get you to do. Altercate SC from YouTube said it best. Figuring things out on your own is fun, and following directions is boring. So let's look at some bright sides of the job system. There were 22 jobs. Some of them came from the first Final Fantasy game, to include such things as Fighter, White Mage, Black Mage, but there were also several creative classes that we had yet to encounter, such as the Sage, the Invoker, the Ninja. What's nice about the job system is you can change jobs anytime outside of battle using the capacity points that you've built, and new jobs are unlocked throughout the story. New jobs offer potentially new spells, new statistics, and even new equipment that you can now use. It was something new to the series, as mentioned before, and I believe that it was implemented reasonably well given the circumstances. Now, Final Fantasy really raises the bar for vehicles. I'm especially partial to the airship, the Invincible, that you receive towards the end of the game. It's the first entry in the series that allows you to actually explore the floor plan of the ship, and even includes a shop, a rest area, and a place to summon a fat chocobo. What's a fat chocobo? Well, let me tell you, this is their creative solution to one of the game's potential flaws, which is limited inventory space of only 32 slots. This small slot capacity is further exacerbated by required story items and maintaining equipment for multiple jobs. The Fat Chocobo serves as a large inventory that the player can access from multiple points in the game using the Gristle Greens. And these Chocobos, although found in different places in the game, will still carry the same equipment that you put into it. It's similar to the item storage system on the PC in Pokemon titles. Some people see this as a hassle, but to me, it's another feature of the game that challenges you to plan ahead and more fully commit to certain jobs. Otherwise, you could swap out multiple jobs in the dungeon with little consequence. The story here is classic Final Fantasy, with four light warriors, crystals, young adventurers out to save the world, and a coming of age narrative. However, there is some recurring themes, one of which is death, and I think it's more present in this title than the previous two entries. And I suspect that has something to do with a very sad situation. Unfortunately, Mr. Sakaguchi lost his mother to a house fire during the development of Final Fantasy III, and I suspect it reflected in some of the game's story plot points. May she rest in peace. Now, on a brighter note, the best thing about the story is that your heroes are not predefined. You, the player, get to determine how they evolve over the course of gameplay depending on the jobs and equipment you have. You can fill in the blanks with your own imagination. Final Fantasy III is a groundbreaking, underappreciated Famicom cart that brought the series from great into the territory of epic, and even outshines later Final Fantasy titles. And I will leave you with this, a quote from Final Fantasy III. When hope seems lost, you must find the strength to go on. You must find the last speck of light and shine hope upon it all.
Final Fantasy III. You know, it's funny. I remember when I was first getting into ROMs and emulators. This was in the late '90s, and we were using a DOS-based emulator. And we would cruise for the ROMs from individual small Web 1.0 type websites because there wasn't a central cultural hub, not yet anyway, for the ROMs themselves. But you could already get English versions of Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3 for the Famicom. Playable on an NES emulator on the West, which at the time was Voodoo Black Magic. I had been warned by a friend of mine that 2 and 3 were not great. And what a disservice that warning was. Later in life, much later in life, I played Final Fantasy III on the Ouya. Now, Conflicting with Hemrock, that means the one I played was the 3D remake that they developed for the DS. But you have to understand, I was a big Ouya fan at the time, and that system was widely panned by the rest of the industry. Like, I actually took personal insults from other people just because I really liked the Ouya. So when Final Fantasy III came out for it, it was like a big company lending a little bit of legitimacy to that system. So I got a hold of that game, and I played it, and I didn't play it all the way through because something happened to kill my save because Ouya is going to be Ouya. But I really enjoyed it. I remember, because I had been warned about the job system, I looked up like a winning job selection build for a playthrough, just so that I could skip any potential issues, because I knew I was playing a game like 20 years after it was originally developed. I wasn't worried, too much about getting it right. And to Hemrock's point, discovering things is great. It's fun. Being told instructions is boring, and getting soft locked is absolutely infuriating. So that's what I was trying to avoid. I remember really enjoying playing the Final Fantasy formula again, because I hadn't touched that type of game in quite some time. I remember getting stuck on a boss that looked like a skeleton jester, and playing that boss fight like 3, 4, 5 times, finally beating it, and having this huge rush of like triumph, having beaten this boss. And it was a really good time. And that was one of those things where when I lost the save file, I mourned the loss of that save file. I ended up buying Final Fantasy III, once again, we're talking about the 3D remake, on Steam years later after that, and I never revisited it because, having to start from scratch again. Fun game, though. This is from a non-RPG guy, a guy who doesn't finish RPGs. That's among the ones I remember very fondly. Big thanks to Hemrock for putting that together. All right, let's head over to emeraldrangers.com and see what comments we have. Death Adder writes in, "Oh man, I just randomly pulled Terry Funk's name out of the blue for that comment. So weird that he passed away not long after. I guess it's better not to mention any more celebrities in the comments. Yikes." I had all the same concerns you did about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game, so I used Xbox Game Pass Ultimate to cash in on a 1-month rental of it. I don't want to say too much about the game because I don't want to ruin it for you, but I think you'll like it. You can tell right away that it was made by the Friday the 13th people. I think you said you were getting a new computer later this year. I believe that will be a strong, there will be a strong community around 6 months from now, and probably longer. Best of all, there's no politics or genders, or genders. There's no politics or generators to be found. Just sweet chainsaw deaths. No genders at all. They're all robots and eunuchs. Thanks, man. Good to hear from you, Death Adder. Hope you're doing well. Gaming Beast, Sean, he writes in, "I don't really care for voice actors, mostly, but I like the funny tone you took. I saw the Texas Chainsaw game. I'm happy they get another chance to at a multiplayer horror game. The few times I managed to get to play Friday the 13th was pretty cool, since the killer just did one thing, hunt the other players. No hooking players, no players on hooks where they could escape. It felt more like what a slasher-style horror game should be. I've seen other games in the Dead by Daylight style, and they looked okay to terror bad, but the problem would be low player count and no bot support, which is a problem which small, old, or obscure multiplayer games, 90% of the players are playing Fortnite and CO or the latest metagame. So even if a game like this could be cool, there usually won't be enough players, unless a specific niche is not yet oversaturated, like the horror multiplayer genre. FF8 was a game I thought was too complex until Swingle taught me what's important in the system. Yes, it's a weird system, but it was great once you understood how it worked and how you could exploit it. You could junction spells and gain immunity to debuffs that had a 100% of the spell, which was very, very important for enemies like Marlboro. Yes, you heard right. It's a smoking is bad themed monster. Level scaling was annoying, but it became about junctioning everything to the point where it didn't matter much. It also is interesting that limit breaks depended on how the items and junctions you equipped and how your health was. then doing the mini game as well. I remember that the final boss staying low in health, only sometimes healing Squall, so you can do his Gunblade limit breaks. Then they tried something different, like with Final Fantasy V, and a lot of people didn't like it. I feel for me, it's like playing a harder and older Western CRPG like Wizardry 6 or Might and Magic, and learning the system rather than exploiting it. It's not as chill of a game where you can just grind to victory. It's a different style of game, which I do enjoy at times. I agree with Hemrock that the Triple Triad game, exactly for the rule changes you have to keep track of. Might and Magic 7 and 8 had Archomage, which was great. It wasn't about collecting the cards, it was about beating every tavern keeper in the realm. There were house rules in every one of them, yes, but they were specific for the tavern. Fallout New Vegas had Caravan, which was also better. OC Remix has some cool stuff on there. Even my brother made a jazzy Mega Man 3 remix ages ago. Anyway, that's all. Keep rolling, broski. Okay, we have got to get your brother's Mega Man 3 remix on the show. This is like a necessity. Please. I'm going to talk to you about this off the air. We have to make this happen. I can't wait. For those of you who don't know, without giving away too much personal information, Sean comes from a very musical family, amongst his relatives. You mentioned Caravan. I remember Caravan being like the card game that's in Fallout New Vegas. It was really weird. I honestly did not like Caravan as much as to be honest, I didn't play the Final Fantasy 8 one, but I played the Final Fantasy 9 card game, and I didn't think Caravan was as good as that. But that's just me. A lot of good stuff in there, man. It's good to hear from you. I think the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game, Death Adder mentioned that he got to try it from Game Pass, and I think a lot of people tried it that way, which means, if I understand this right, Game Pass lasts like a month if you just buy it to play the one game, which means there would be a spike in players for that first month, and then when Game Pass runs out for those people, it would crash. And then you'd look at the player count history, and it would look just like any other game. High player count in the beginning, and then a crash. So if there's still a player count when my new computer is built/ordered, then I'll definitely pick it up. Sean, and Death Adder, good to hear from you both. All right, I got one more from Sean. This is for a previous, past episode. He says, for 460, what is the name of the dungeon crawler you mentioned? And of course, he's talking about the game Demon Lord Reincarnation. The mapping tool sounds cool. I only use the ones that have the map for old games that don't have... I only use ones like that have... Hold on, how does he say it? I only use ones that have the map for old games that didn't have a mini-map. I played Might and Magic 1 with this, and it makes it more playable. I did mapping myself for old RPG games, but that's something I can't live without now. It's funny you mentioned Drakenlord, the German Chris Chan-esque lol cow. All I say is he is a sight to behold, lol. His detractors are quite sadistic, though, but he brought it all on himself. Yeah, I don't know much about that guy. This is CF now breaking from his comment. I don't know much about that guy outside of Count Dankula's videos, because he had, count 'em, 3 episodes of the Mad Lads series, and those were just hilarious to me. But I would also say the people who showed up at his house, yeah, those guys were definitely in the wrong. I don't care how weird he is, or much of an a-hole he is, or how short his temper is, or how mentally ill is. If you show up at someone else's house meaning trouble, then you're a jerk. But anyway, moving along. Hemrock, your classic Game Fest adventures sounded cool. It's also great and wholesome that you brought your daughter to it. Yes, indeed. Emulation and hobbyists that can repair the old consoles is going to be more and more important as the hardware of the old machines breaks more and more often. I wonder when we're really old, what system might still work. The CD-based ones surely won't. Either way, great episode, guys. You know, it's funny you bring something up. The CD-based consoles won't work anymore, but the cartridge-based consoles might. However, because of the way data flows on optical discs, those games, I think, are going to be better preserved. Because any guy who owns a PS1 game, and a PC can rip himself an ISO so they're better preserved. Whereas if you have an NES, you can only back your games up if you have a cartridge reader, that can read the EEPROM. And from what I understand, doing so for an NES is a complicated proposition. It's not like ripping a CD. So you have to rely entirely on the rest of the world to back your things up. So yeah, you're right. But I think it's an interesting dichotomy. And that is the end of the fail bag, and thus the end of this week's TCR. Thanks for tuning in to Tiger Claw Radio and spending some time hanging out, listening to chiptunes and talking video games. I appreciate it. And whatever it is you have going on in your life this week, I hope it goes well for you. I really do. I'm rooting for you. I'll see you next week.